here's something that will shift how you see everything. When you say, I need to listen to myself, which self are you talking about? Because here's what most people don't realise. There isn't just one voice in there. There's a whole crowd. Right now, as you're hearing this, notice what's happening in your mind. There's the part that's listening to these words. There's probably another part commenting on what I'm saying. Maybe there's a part planning what you'll do after this video. Another part might be judging whether this is worth your time. That's at least 4 different voices, and we're just getting started. Most people think they have one continuous self, like there's this consistent you that's been the same person since childhood. But watch your thoughts for just 5 minutes. You'll notice something strange. The voice in your head keeps changing. Sometimes it sounds like your mother. Sometimes it echoes something a teacher said years ago. Sometimes it's harsh and critical. Other times it's encouraging. Sometimes it's scared. Sometimes bold. Which one is the real you? Here's where it gets interesting. We've been conditioned to believe that all these voices are us. But they're not. They're like radio stations, and your awareness has been unconsciously tuning in and out of different frequencies your entire life. You think you're the DJ, but you've actually been letting the radio scan stations automatically. The voice that says, I'm not good enough, where did that come from? When you were 5 years old, did you wake up one day and decide you weren't good enough? Of course not. Someone planted that idea, and now it plays on repeat like a broken record. But you think it's your authentic inner voice. The voice that says, I should be more successful. Is that really you, or is that society's programming running in your head? The voice that says, I need to be perfect. When did you actually choose that belief? You didn't. It chose you, or rather it was chosen for you. Most of what we call listening to ourselves is actually listening to a collection of borrowed thoughts, inherited beliefs, and program responses. It's like having a smartphone that's been installed with apps you never chose, and now they're all sending you notifications. You think the notifications are your own thoughts, but they're just software running in the background. The real you, the one that's actually worth listening to, isn't any of these voices. The real you is the space in which all these voices appear. It's the awareness that notices them coming and going. It's the silence between thoughts. It's what remains when all the mental chatter stops. Think about this. When you were deeply absorbed in something you loved as a child, building with blocks, drawing, playing, where were all these voices then? They weren't there, were they? There was just pure engagement, pure being. That's closer to your authentic self than any thought you've ever had about yourself. The voices in your head are like weather patterns. They come and go. Sometimes it's stormy, sometimes it's calm, but you're not the weather. You're the sky in which all weather appears. The sky doesn't get wet when it rains. It doesn't get blown around by the wind. It simply allows everything to happen within it. This is why traditional advice about listening to yourself often leads people in circles. They are listening to the weather and thinking it's the sky. They're tuning in to random radio stations and thinking it's their authentic voice. They're reading notifications from apps they never installed and thinking it's their own wisdom. But once you realise you're the sky, not the weather, everything changes. Once you understand you're the awareness, not the thoughts, you can finally hear what's actually there underneath all the noise. And what you'll find underneath is something much quieter, much simpler, and infinitely more trustworthy than any voice that's been running commentary in your head. The authentic self doesn't speak in words. It speaks in knowing. It doesn't argue or explain. It simply is. It doesn't need to convince you of anything because it's already complete. When you touch this space, you'll know immediately. It feels like coming home after a long journey through foreign countries. This is what real listening to yourself means. Not listening to the crowd of voices, but recognizing the listening itself. Now that you know you're not the voices in your head, let's talk about what real listening actually looks like. Because this isn't some mystical concept. It operates by very specific principles. Like everything else in reality. Think of it this way. You have a radio that's been stuck on scan mode your entire life, jumping from station to station. One moment you're tuned into Anxiety FM, the next it's Guilt Radio, then it switches to Ambition Station. You've been thinking this constant channel surfing is normal, but it's not. It's just a setting that can be changed. Real listening happens when you stop the scanning and tune into the frequency that's always been there, underneath all the others. This frequency doesn't broadcast thoughts or opinions or judgments. It broadcasts something else entirely, direct knowing. Here's how you can feel the difference right now. Think about something you're worried about. Notice how that worry feels in your body. There's tension, right? Maybe in your chest, your shoulders, your stomach. That's the signal from worry radio. It creates physical static. Now think about something you absolutely know to be true, like the fact that you exist, or that you're aware right now. Notice how that knowing feels. There's no tension, no argument, no need for proof. It's just quietly, solidly there. That's the frequency of authentic knowing. The worry voice says, what if this happens? Or what if that goes wrong? It creates stories, about possible futures that don't exist yet, but authentic knowing only speaks about what's actually here, right now. It doesn't deal in speculation. It deals in what is. Most people have been listening to speculation their whole lives and calling it intuition. Real intuition doesn't guess about the future. It perceives what's present. It notices what's actually happening beneath the surface of things. For example, you meet someone and immediately something feels off, but you can't put your finger on why. That's authentic perception. Cutting through social programming, your mind might say they seem nice enough because it's running politeness radio. But something deeper is reading the actual energy signature of the interaction. This deeper listening isn't emotional. Emotions are like weather systems. They come and go. They have opinions, they react to things. Authentic knowing is more like gravity. It's always there, it's reliable, and it doesn't have moods. Watch what happens when you have a decision to make. The voices in your head will immediately start debating. They'll list pros and cons, imagine scenarios, create anxiety about making the wrong choice. But underneath all that mental noise, there's usually something that already knows. It's not loud, it's not insistent, but it's steady. The tricky part is that this real knowing often contradicts what you think you should want. Your mental voices might be saying, take the job, it pays more. But something deeper says, this isn't your path. Your social programming says, stay in this relationship. You're supposed to make it work. But authentic knowing says, this ended long ago. Here's where most people get confused. They think listening to themselves means following their desires, or their fears, or their social conditioning. But desires change. Fears lie to you. And social conditioning was never yours to begin with. Authentic knowing is the only thing that remains consistent because it's connected to what's actually true, not what you've been told should be true. The mind loves complexity. It wants to analyse everything, compare options, create elaborate decision trees. But authentic knowing is remarkably simple. It points in one direction with quiet certainty. No drama, no explanation needed. Technical moment. If what you're hearing right now resonates with you, hit subscribe. This shows that the information is valuable. This is why meditation isn't about emptying your mind. That's impossible anyway. It's about learning to recognize the difference between the scanning radio and the steady frequency underneath. Once you can tell them apart, you can choose what to tune into. The authentic frequency is always broadcasting. It never goes offline, but it's subtle, like a whisper in a room full of people shouting. You have to get quiet enough to hear it, And once you do, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. Because unlike all those other voices, this one actually knows what it's talking about. So now you know the difference between the radio static and the real signal. But how do you actually use this in daily life? Because knowing about it and living from it are completely different things. Here's what nobody tells you about authentic listening. It requires you to become comfortable with disappointing people, including yourself. Let me explain what I mean. You're in a conversation and someone is telling you their problems. Your social programming immediately kicks in with responses. You should offer advice. You need to fix this. Say something supportive. But if you actually listen to what's really happening, you might notice that this person doesn't want solutions. They want to be heard. Or maybe they're energy draining, and you need to create some distance. The authentic response might be silence, or a gentle boundary, or simply saying, "I hear you," instead of jumping into fix-it mode. But this disappoints the part of you that wants to be seen as helpful. It might disappoint them too. If they were expecting you to take on their emotional burden, most people can't handle this level of authenticity because they're more afraid of disappointing others than they are committed to truth. But here's what happens when you start following authentic knowing instead of social programming. Your relationships either get much deeper or they end. There's no middle ground. Same thing happens with career decisions. Your family expects you to be practical. Your friends expect you to be ambitious. Society expects you to climb ladders and accumulate things. But what if your authentic knowing says, none of this matters to you? What if it points towards something simpler or something that doesn't make obvious sense? I know someone who left a 6-figure corporate job to become a park ranger. Everyone thought they'd lost their mind. But 5 years later, they're the most centered person I know. They followed something deeper than logic, deeper than expectations, and it led them exactly where they needed to be. Here's a practical way to tell the difference between authentic knowing and everything else. Authentic knowing never creates inner conflict. It might create external challenges. People might not understand your choices, circumstances might need to shift, but internally there's peace. There's a sense of rightness, even when things get difficult. False signals always create inattention. Even when they promise good outcomes, something feels forced. You find yourself having to convince yourself. You need external validation. You keep second guessing. Try this experiment. Think about a decision you're facing. Notice what your mind immediately starts doing. Analysing, comparing, worrying about outcomes. And get quiet for a moment. Breathe. Ask yourself not, what should I do? But what do I already know about this? Don't wait for thoughts. Wait for something quieter. It might come as a physical sensation, expansion in your chest versus contraction. It might come as a subtle knowing that has no words. It might be as simple as one path feeling light and another feeling heavy. The mind will immediately jump in and say, "But that's not practical," or "What will people think?" Notice that. Those are different voices entirely. They're not wrong for existing, but they're not your navigation system either. Here's something else that happens when you start living from authentic knowing. Synchronicities increase dramatically. It's like reality starts cooperating with you in ways that seem almost magical. Opportunities appear, the right people show up, things fall into place with less effort. This isn't wishful thinking. When you're aligned with what's actually true for you, you're working with the natural flow of things instead of against it. It's like swimming downstream instead of upstream. Less struggle, more movement. But this requires giving up control in the way most people understand it. You can't manipulate outcomes from this space. You can't force timing. You have to trust something larger than your personal will. And for most people, this is terrifying. They'd rather stay in familiar suffering than risk unknown freedom. The strange thing is, once you start following authentic knowing consistently, you realise it was never really unknown. Part of you has always known exactly what you needed to do, where you needed to go, how you needed to live. You just got distracted by all the other voices claiming to know better. Your authentic self has been patiently waiting this whole time for you to remember how to listen. Not to the crowd of commentators in your head, not to other people's expectations, but to the quiet certainty that's been there all along. When you live from this place, decisions become much simpler. Not easier necessarily, but simpler. Because instead of weighing hundreds of variables, you're listening to one clear signal. And that signal has never been wrong about what's truly right for you. When you finally stop listening to the committee in your head and start following authentic knowing, something fundamental shifts. Life stops feeling like you're swimming against the current all the time. Most people spend their entire lives exhausted because they're constantly fighting their own nature. They take jobs that drain them because they think they should. They stay in relationships that feel empty because they think they're supposed to. They chase goals that don't actually matter to them because someone else decided those goals were important. But when you align with what's actually true for you, effort transforms into flow. You're still working, still growing, still facing challenges, but it feels completely different. Like you're finally moving in the direction you were always meant to go, Here's what this looks like. Practically, you stop forcing conversations that feel unnatural. You stop pretending to be interested in things that bore you. You stop saying yes when everything inside you is saying no. And the surprising thing is, people respect you more, not less, because authenticity has power. When someone is genuinely themselves, without apology or performance, others can feel it. It's magnetic in a way that trying to be likable never is. This doesn't mean you become selfish or inconsiderate. Authentic knowing includes awareness of others, but from a place of genuine care, not social obligation. You help people because you actually want to help them, not because you think you should. The difference is enormous. When you live this way, your energy stops leaking out in all directions. Instead of spreading yourself thin, trying to meet everyone else's expectations, you become focused, concentrated, like sunlight through a magnifying glass. Instead of general warmth, you create fire. Your work becomes an expression of who you are, rather than something you do to pay bills. Your relationships become connections between authentic selves rather than social performances. Your choices start reflecting your actual values instead of inherited programming. But here's what nobody warns you about. This level of authenticity is threatening to people who are still living from their programming. When someone sees you living freely, it reminds them of their own imprisonment. They'll try to pull you back into familiar patterns, often disguised as concern or advice. You have to become comfortable with this. Not everyone will understand your choices. Not everyone will support your authenticity. Some people will actively resist it. But their resistance isn't really about you. It's about their own fear of freedom. The people who truly belong in your life will recognize what's happening and either join you in this level of realness or step aside with respect. The ones who fight it were never really connected to you anyway. They were connected to your performance, your compliance, your willingness to be smaller than you actually are. This is why authentic living requires courage. Not the courage to do dangerous things, but the courage to disappoint people who have invested in keeping you small. The courage to trust your inner knowing even when you can't explain it logically. The courage to be disliked for being real rather than loved for being fake. But once you taste this freedom, you can never go back. Once you experience the peace of living in alignment with your actual nature, the old ways of being feel suffocating, like trying to squeeze back into clothes you wore as a child. Your life becomes your message. not through what you say, but through how you move through the world. People can feel when someone is living authentically, and it gives them permission to consider the same possibility for themselves. This is how real change spreads, not through convincing or preaching, but through example. Through someone having the courage to live as their actual self and showing others what's possible. The world needs people who are willing to listen to their authentic knowing and act on it. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Not because everyone will understand, but because reality itself supports authenticity in ways that it never supports pretense. If this video has changed something in you, write in the comments, "I choose authenticity." Write it as your promise to yourself. Living authentically isn't a destination you reach. It's a moment-by-moment choice to listen to what's real instead of what's expected. And every time you make that choice, you become more yourself and less everyone else's idea of who you should be. That's the only life worth living, nobody.